Breaking right now, the British royal family mired in one of its biggest crises in history.
King Charles confesses to being responsible for Harry leaving. The sick monarch, who has been tidying up his estates, handed Anne 3 sealed letters containing explosive truths about royal systems that destroyed his son's bond. Not sure how much time he has to live with cancer tearing through his body, Charles has entrusted Anne with an impossible mission to reunite the two brothers who haven't spoken in years. But can decades of hurt, misunderstanding, and distance really be repaired? And what truth waited inside that final sealed envelope? Join us as Princess Anne reveals the king's final wish for his sons. Charles' deathbed. Confession. Watching a moment play out inside Windsor, according to sources, this story could shake the monarchy at its core. It begins with a private exchange, a 76-year-old King Charles looking directly at Princess Anne and admitting something he's never said aloud. In this account, he tells her he, not Meghan, not the press, not William, is the reason Harry walked away. Accounting to the account, his hands tremble as he opens an envelope he's kept hidden for years. Inside are letters meant for his sons, and with them, a confession. He recalls telling an 18-year-old Harry, still raw from Diana's death, that his role was to support William and never outshine him. He now believes that message convinced Harry he mattered less. This moment is just months after Diana's funeral, during a shooting weekend at Balmoral. According to the narrative, Charles thought he was preparing Harry for royal life. Instead, he believes he cemented a wound. The letters go further. In them, Charles explains that decisions Harry once blamed on William were actually directed by the palace under Charles's authority. Staff assignments that left Harry isolated, communication strategies that protected the heir, financial gaps that created resentment. In this version of events, the king admits he built a system that pushed the brothers into rivalry without either realizing who designed it. Documents described in the story outline examples, press briefings from 2005 framing Harry as reckless while emphasizing William's responsibility, security changes in 2011 that reduced Harry's protection, and financial records showing Harry receiving significantly less support than his brother for similar duties. Princess Anne, in this telling, becomes the keeper of all 3 sealed letters. She sits in Charles's study as he lays out an impossible timeline. 6 months to deliver the truth and attempt reconciliation. He fears dying with his sons estranged more than any failure of kingship. The letters aren't just apologies. They reveal decades of behind-the-scenes decisions neither brother knew about. And Anne is chosen for one reason. She's the only person both men trust. William sees her as steady and fair. Harry remembers her as the aunt who challenged him without judgment. Before she leaves, Charles hands her a 3rd envelope, sealed in wax and meant for her alone, to be opened only after his death. It explains why she was chosen for this final task. Anne walks out of Windsor with the briefcase locked, the clock ticking, and the burden of a family truth within this narrative that could either heal 2 brothers or deepen the divide forever. How did Anne even discover Charles was dying? What happened before she received this impossible mission, the 10:47 p.m. call, and the impossible envelopes? The entire story begins at Gatcombe Park, where a single late-night phone call breaks Princess Anne's strict routine. It's 10:47 p.m., an hour when her phone simply doesn't ring. On the other end is Dr. Harrison, speaking with careful precision. The king wants to see her first thing in the morning, alone. For Anne, that detail says everything. Public updates on Charles's illness had framed it as manageable. But when a doctor calls at night, at his request, the situation is rarely routine. She asks the only question that matters: how bad? The silence before the answer is more revealing than the words that follow. Anne has always occupied a unique place in the family, close enough to understand the pressures of the crown, distant enough to avoid being swallowed by them. As the second child, she lived beside the expectations placed on her brother without carrying them herself. Decades of service, discipline, and blunt practicality shaped her into the family's quiet anchor. Driving to Windsor at dawn, she can't help but think back to the last time Charles summoned her urgently, the day their mother died. Anne had been the only royal at Balmoral when Queen Elizabeth passed. The Queen's final words to her had been about William and Harry, two grandsons she believed were lost in different ways. She asked Anne to help them find their way back to each other. At the time, Anne had no idea that Charles himself would later place that responsibility squarely in her hands. Now, let's step back to the moment that reshaped the entire royal family, the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen died on September 8, 2022, at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, her summer residence, and the same place she had chosen for private family milestones throughout her life. It was a location she loved, and where she often felt most at ease. Officially, the cause of death recorded on her certificate was old age. There were no sudden events, no dramatic final hours, just a gradual decline that had become more visible in her final months. In the days leading up to her death, the palace issued short, understated statements about mobility issues and the need to adjust her schedule. There was no explicit language about a crisis, but insiders and observers noted her increasingly fragile appearance. Her final public act came just 2 days before she died, when she met the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Even then, she insisted on carrying out the duty personally, despite clear signs of frailty. By the morning of September 8th, doctors expressed concern and placed her under medical supervision. The palace's wording, "We're concerned for Her Majesty's health," was a signal that the situation had shifted dramatically. Members of the royal family began rushing to Balmoral. Charles and Camilla were already in Scotland. Others hurried north. Anne, however, was already there. As later confirmed in official statements, Princess Anne remained at her mother's side during the Queen's final hours. She later revealed she had spent the last 24 hours with her mother. That moment placed Anne in a unique position. She became the last immediate family member to see the Queen alive and the first to witness the beginning of a new reign. At 6:30 p.m. that evening, Buckingham Palace announced the news the world had been bracing for. Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history, had died peacefully at Balmoral. The days that followed were marked by a national outpouring of grief, processions, vigils, tributes spanning decades of service. But for the family, especially Anne, the moment was far more intimate. She later said she felt honored and grateful to have been with her mother at the end, acknowledging both the personal loss and the historic transition unfolding around her. For Anne, the Queen's passing wasn't just the end of a reign, it was the beginning of a responsibility she had quietly carried ever since, helping guide the next generation through a family still shaped by grief, duty, and the weight of legacy. Anne had her orders, but would the boys even agree to read their father's letter? Or would years of rage make them refuse the dying king's final request? William's fury and Catherine's words. Tensions have since risen inside Kensington Palace the moment William sets the unopened letter on his desk. His voice goes cold. "Both of us. You mean Harry? Then this conversation is finished." He steps away, pacing toward the window, holding on to his composure by sheer force. For 4 years, the public rift between the brothers has played out across interviews, documentaries, and headlines. In this narrative, William runs through every explosive moment. The televised interview, where Harry said a member of the family questioned his son's skin color. The streaming series that included private family footage. The memoir describing an argument that escalated into physical conflict. He told the world, "I attacked him, and now father wants me to pretend none of it happened?" William spoke with so much anger, but you couldn't miss the hurt. Anne doesn't argue. She simply tells him she wants him to read the letter. What he does after is his choice. That envelope shadows William through hours of engagements, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, carrying out duties, with the poise expected of a future king. But back in Kensington Palace that night, he finally breaks the seal. Inside, Charles's handwriting is instantly recognizable. The message is blunt. "I'm going to tell you something I should have told you years ago." What follows is a confession that reframes everything. Charles describes, within this story, a series of decisions William never knew about. Staff changes, security adjustments, press strategies, financial allocations. Each choice was made to stabilize the institution, but the unintended consequence was widening the divide between his sons. The narrative reveals how certain portrayals of Harry as the unpredictable one were shaped by palace strategy meant to highlight William's steadiness. Financial disparities that left Harry feeling dependent were approved year after year. Security arrangements meant to protect the heir's young family had ripple effects neither brother understood at the time. One paragraph brings William to a dead stop. Charles writes about Christmas 2018, when William privately questioned why Harry's security was being reduced. In this version of events, Charles admits he'd told William it was Harry's choice, when it wasn't. "That was a lie," the letter reads. Charles explains that the cut was his decision, and he allowed William to believe Harry was acting recklessly. Later, when Harry cited safety concerns as part of his decision to step back from royal duties, William dismissed them, unaware of the truth behind the scenes. When Catherine enters the room, the pages are spread across the desk, and William is rigid with disbelief. "He's manipulating you," he says. "Even dying, he's manipulating both of us." But Catherine, steady and direct, offers another view. Or maybe he's finally being honest about his part in everything that broke down. Maybe knowing why things happened changes what forgiveness even means. Her own experience with harsh press coverage has shaped how she sees the pressures of the institution. She knows how narratives can be crafted, how reputations can shift with a single headline. "I'm not saying forget everything," she tells him. "I'm saying this might show you that the fight was never just between you and Harry. Maybe you were both fighting the system around you." Silence stretches before William finally exhales. The letter hasn't repaired anything, not yet, but it's changed the landscape. That night, he calls Anne, telling her he agreed to the meeting, but he had conditions. William has agreed to meet, but thousands of miles away in California, would Harry even take Anne's call? Or had the damage gone too deep to ever repair? Midnight, in Montecito, Harry breaks down. Harry's phone lit up at midnight with an unfamiliar UK number. Instinct told him to ignore it. California had taught him the value of boundaries, but something in his gut pushed him to pick up. On the line was Princess Anne. Her tone was steady, almost clinical, as she told him what no one ever expects to hear. In this story, Charles had been given roughly 6 months. Then came the second blow. She carried a letter for him, one meant to explain decisions he had never been told about. The call left Harry staring into the dark, replaying the last time he'd spoken to his father. It had been a short, formal exchange about coronation logistics. No warmth, no hint of illness. A 7-minute conversation that suddenly felt like a missed goodbye. Harry's first reaction was defensive. He told her he didn't need explanations, he had lived it. But her reply held the weight of someone who had seen far more than she'd ever said aloud. "You don't know everything." A courier arrived the next morning. The sealed envelope sat in Harry's hands for nearly an hour before he finally broke it open. The words hit immediately. Meghan found him in his office, pages spread across the desk, tears on his face as he whispered that his father had known all along. All those moments he blamed William. His father knew and let it stand. The letter in this narrative unfolded with stark honesty. Charles admitted to choices that had influenced both sons differently, policies that favored the heir, expectations that boxed in the spare, and moments where he'd stepped back rather than intervene. One passage struck Harry hardest, a confession about a moment in 2019 when Harry had asked for help during a crisis, unaware that financial and security decisions had already been made behind the scenes. In the letter, Charles acknowledged that these choices shaped Harry's sense of vulnerability, creating fractures he hadn't fully understood at the time. For 3 days, Harry sat with the letter. He reread it, compared memories, talked through every line with Meghan and his therapist. The question Meghan posed lingered in the air. If he went back and it went badly, will it reopen wounds that had finally closed? Harry wrestled with that. Was peace the same as healing? He wondered aloud. Or if it was just avoiding the places that still hurt. In a late-night session, he confronted another fear, the possibility that in telling his story publicly, he had painted William into a corner he hadn't fully earned. What if his truth was incomplete? What if his brother was just as trapped as I was? Before dawn, Harry made the call. Anne answered immediately. His message was clear. He would come, but only privately, with no cameras, no staging, no leaks. A few hours later, Meghan found him staring at photos of their children. His voice was quiet, but certain. If he didn't go, he said, he risked teaching his children that pride outranked connection. Meghan squeezed his hand and told him he had found his answer already. He just needed to hear himself say it. Both brothers have agreed to meet, but when they finally face each other at Balmoral, would Charles's confession bring reconciliation, or would it trigger the most explosive confrontation in royal history? I envied you, and the documents prove everything. The situation inside Balmoral Lodge unfolded like a scene building toward a breaking point. In this developing narrative, tensions were already running high when Harry stepped into the room. William stood by the window, shoulders locked, while Princess Anne commanded both brothers to sit. The atmosphere felt charged, the kind of moment where decades of unspoken history suddenly pressed into the present. William started first, his tone sharp. He questioned whether a final letter from their father, revealed earlier in this storyline, somehow cleared Harry of his own past decisions. Harry countered calmly, insisting that both of them had been reacting for years to a system that kept them in the dark. Their exchange carried the weight of two men who had spent half their lives misreading each other, and then shifted the energy of the room when she produced a folder of documents gathered within the story's timeline. In this fictional sequence, the papers included palace records, staff notes, and internal communications tracking back decades. Her point was simple. Harry's perception of unequal treatment wasn't imagined. It had been embedded in the structure around them. Financial breakdowns, security arrangements, media strategies, all laid out in black and white. The revelation didn't erase Harry's mistakes, and Anne made that clear, but it reframed them. It showed that both brothers had been influenced by forces larger than their own choices. As William scanned the documents, Catherine stepped in carefully, acknowledging the harm caused by public interviews and the memoir Harry had released earlier in the story's arc. Harry surprised the room by accepting responsibility and admitting regret for moments where he'd let hurt guide his actions. The conversation shifted again when William stepped away from the table, struggling to maintain composure. When he finally spoke, it was with a vulnerability rarely shown. He admitted that the pressure of succession had shaped him from childhood, leaving him little room to express anything beyond stability. He confessed something he had never said aloud. In many ways, he had envied Harry's ability to step outside the institution that defined both of their lives. Harry, meanwhile, admitted that from his point of view, William had always seemed favored, more secure, more respected. But as the tension began to thaw, both men realized they had been interpreting the same environment through opposite lenses. Neither had understood how trapped the other felt. The room settled into a quiet that felt less like avoidance and more like reflection. For the first time in years within this fictional narrative, both brothers were seeing each other without the filters of public expectation and family protocol. By evening, they agreed to draft a joint statement. Imperfect, cautious, but genuine. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was the first movement toward it. In the end, the day at Balmoral Lodge didn't resolve everything, but it marked a shift. It showed that even in the most tightly controlled environments, understanding can surface when truth finally enters the room. They'd finally heard each other, but could they actually stand together before the world? What would Charles demand of his sons in his final public moment? Charles's final command. At exactly 6 p.m., the country paused as a historic broadcast began. Charles appeared at the same desk his mother once used during the pandemic, but the contrast was unmistakable. Where Elizabeth had projected steady calm, Charles carried a visible weight. In this developing narrative, he addressed the nation with a mixture of precision and vulnerability, outlining the seriousness of his diagnosis and the limited timeline doctors had given him. The moment shifted dramatically when he motioned for William and Harry to join him on camera. For the first time in years within this story's timeline, the brothers stood side by side, a visual that immediately seized the nation's attention. The broadcast evolved from a grim health update into a symbolic turning point for a family long defined by distance. As the statement unfolded, the tone was deliberate and unified. William focused on perspective, how illness reframes priorities and reminds families of what truly matters. Harry emphasized the pressures that had contributed to past fractures and the joint decision to move forward differently. Their words, woven together, centered on accountability, empathy, and the belief that reconciliation is a process rather than a performance. The joint message acknowledged past mistakes without dwelling on them. It framed vulnerability as a form of strength and presented the moment not as a final resolution, but as a conscious shift in direction. The brothers made clear that their father's condition had become a catalyst for clarity, pushing them to reassess old narratives and make room for something healthier. Reactions poured in instantly. Online debates flared, with some viewers skeptical of the timing and others moved by the unity on display. Yet across platforms, the dominant response was a cautious sense of hope. For a family often seen through the lens of conflict, the broadcast felt like a rare alignment of purpose. What the cameras didn't capture became just as significant. After the broadcast ended, Charles requested time alone with his sons. Away from the public eye, he reflected on the years behind them with a mixture of pride and regret. He acknowledged the consequences of choices made long before either brother had control over their own lives, and urged them not to let his missteps shape their futures. Standing by the window overlooking the gardens where he once walked with them as children, he offered a quiet recognition of their growth. He saw them as men who had built families of their own and, in many ways, had become versions of what he once hoped to be. It was a private moment, weighted with sincerity, marking the emotional core of a day charged with public significance. In the broader arc of this narrative, the broadcast became more than a health announcement. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, one shaped by honesty, shared responsibility, and a possibility of long-awaited healing. Charles had brought them together. But would it last? Diana's boys. From the very beginning, William and Harry's bond was shaped by an unusual mix of royal duty and very real childhood closeness. They weren't just brothers growing up in the same house. They were two boys navigating a life almost no one else could understand. In their early years, their mother made a deliberate effort to keep them grounded. They went on school runs in an ordinary car, waited in line at theme parks, and spent weekends racing around Kensington Palace on bicycles. William, the older brother, often looked out for Harry at public events, gently guiding him through crowds and ceremonies. And behind the scenes, Harry was known as the lively one, who could make William laugh during even the most formal moments. One of their strongest early bonds was their shared love of mischief. Childhood photos showed them whispering jokes at Trooping the Color, pushing each other into the water during family vacations, and competing fiercely during sports days at Ludgrove and Eton. They rode ponies together at Highgrove, played video games late into the night, and used the same secret shortcuts around palace corridors. Wherever one went, the other wasn't far behind. Then came the moment that defined their brotherhood for the world, walking behind their mother's coffin in 1997. They were just 15 and 12. That slow walk up the mall wasn't only a public act of mourning, it was the point at which they silently leaned on each other, literally step for step. People who saw them later said that in the days that followed, they spent hours together talking, sitting quietly, or simply existing side by side because no one else could fully understand what they had lost. As teenagers, their bond deepened in different ways. They shared a passion for sports, football, skiing trips with their mother, and later, polo matches as adults. Harry would often cheer loudly from the sidelines when William played at school, and William encouraged Harry through the ups and downs of his education. Their military careers later echoed that same closeness. They both trained at Sandhurst, took part in joint engagements, and wore their uniforms with a sense of pride that connected them back to their mother's belief in service. Even as adulthood brought separate roles and responsibilities, their early closeness remained a defining part of their identity. They stood shoulder to shoulder at public events, joined forces for charitable projects, and often spoke about how each had shaped the other's life. Birthdays, family holidays, and shared traditions kept them tied together, even as the world watched their paths diverge. That's why any reconciliation now carries such emotional weight. It's not just about easing tensions or smoothing over disagreements. It's about rediscovering the bond formed long before royal titles or global scrutiny, the bond of two boys who grew up navigating grief, duty, and extraordinary pressure together. It's about reclaiming the memories that shaped them, the laughter, the mischief, the support, and the moments when one brother steadied the other without needing to speak. For William and Harry, reconciliation is personal. It's a return to the foundation of who they were and who, deep down, they still are. If Charles truly played a role in the decisions that pushed Harry and William apart, it raises a difficult question. Did the Queen know any of it was happening? And if she did, why wouldn't she step in to shield her grandsons from the fallout? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.